Hi everyone, welcome back to Swedish Plant Guys. We have a ton of questions from you subscribers, which is so much fun. We read all of them, you should know that, and when we got a question a couple of times, we make a Q&A video like this. So we usually don't answer your questions in the commentary section. We make Q&A videos like this for you guys. So we have a couple of questions this time as well. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new to this, and we will be referencing different videos because the questions usually have a video attached to them. So if you haven't watched that video, please go and watch it, and then you can get this answer as a complement to that video as well. Now, starting off with question number 1. Can you tell me if a Christmas cactus is a candidate for this system? Will this be okay for plants that they say not to water again until it's dry? Now, this is concerning a video we made called the easiest self-watering system. Anybody can do it. And in that, it's a very, very easy system where you just use an outer pot, an inner pot, and some sort of medium to transport the water from the outside to the inside pot, and we used a microfiber cloth. Now the question is, can you use this system for a Christmas cactus or for other plants that wants to dry up in between the watering? The answer is yes, you can use this for a Christmas cactus, but the difference is that since you have more water in your system, you have a lot of water in the outer pot, what you need to do is that when all of that water has been consumed by the plant or evaporated, just let the plant dry out in between the waterings. And then when you water again, you add quite a lot of water, but there is only a certain amount of water that is going to go up into your Christmas cactus. So yes, you can use this system for any type of plant that wants to dry out in between. Just let it dry out in between the waterings so that the roots get that resting period in between the watering. But usually a plant like that perhaps doesn't need to be in a self-watering system because you will be watering it quite rarely. But you can use it in this system, just let it dry out in between, just like you would in a normal situation. Question number 2. When it's time to fertilize the plant, do we put the fertilizer in the reservoir? And this is also concerning the easiest self-watering system, where you have a small water container in the bottom in the outside pot. And when you fertilize this system, the question is, do you fertilize where the water is? No, you don't. We always fertilize, if we mix our fertilizer in water, we always fertilize by adding that on top of the soil or pumice or whatever you've been planting in, and let that run through the system, go through the holes in the bottom of this system, and end up in the bottom of the pot. And the reason is simple, because when you water with fertilizer, you're actually adding salt to your system. And that salt has a positive or negative charge. And you want your cation exchange capacity substrate inside of your system to pick up that fertilizer as it passes through, so that it can distribute that to the roots. If you only add it down into the water, a little bit of it is going to be sucked up, of course, but most of it is going to stay down into the water. And the risk here is that you get too much fertilizer in that water, and that water actually becomes proactive. It's not going, the roots are not going to be able to suck up that water because it has too much salt in it. So when you water to the soil or the pumice. Let it rinse through that and then end up in the bottom of the container, because then your substrate has been able to bind those nutrients on the way through the system. And if you haven't seen this video, please go and watch that video. It's called The Easiest Self-Watering System. Anybody can do it. So watch that video if you want to have a very simple way to be able to water your plants less frequently. Okay. Question number 3, and this question is concerning another Q&A video we've made called Q&A episode 3. If you haven't watched that Q&A, please go and do that as well. And the question is, if your plant develops water roots in pumice, can we eventually transition it to semihydroponics, since the roots are already water roots? Now, I have to divide this question up into a couple of parts. First of all, it's concerning pumice. If you haven't seen our All You Need to Know About Pumice video, go and do that so you know what this is referencing. And also, she's telling us about semihydroponics. Now, what is that? Well, semihydroponics is another way to be able to have plants in another type of substrate. Now, we talk a lot on this channel when you plant in soil or pumice. We usually never reference semi-hydroponics or hydroponics. And that is a system where you use so-called aggregated clay particles or leca pebbles, where you plant your entire plant in only leca, and you have it standing in a lot of water all the time. So the plant actually has all water roots in that type of system, and you have to be very careful with adding the right amount of nutrients and so on. If you do that correctly, it's a very good system to use. Now the question here is, if we have a plant that is growing in pumice, can we make the transition from pumice to semi-hydroponics? And probably not. Now, I've said a couple of times that when we plant in pumice, we get water roots down where the water is, in the water reservoir of the pot. And we have water roots only down there, because in all of the other parts of our container, we will have normal roots. Because here you have the perfect balance between water, substrate, nutrition, and air. But down in the bottom of the pot, where you have a lot of water, there you will get some water roots. So the transition is not that easy, because in a pumice system you have water roots in the downstairs in the container, in the bottom of the container, and you have normal roots as well. So if you would bare root that and just make the transition to hydroponics, the plant would struggle, and a lot of the roots would die, because not all of the roots are water roots. So I would never make that transition. If you have a hydroponic system, always buy plants that are used to that system. It's quite difficult to make that transition yourself. Question number 4, and this is concerning our video about pumice or volcanic rock. You don't have to remove any of the old soil before planting it in pumice. What happens to all that soil, or all the soil? No, we never do that. When we buy a plant, it usually comes like this. It's planted in soil like this one. And what we do is that we just knock off this pot, we plant it completely in our pumice mix around this and underneath this, and we just let it grow like that. So what happens to this soil? Because this soil will still be inside of our container. And what will happen is that all types of normal soil have a lot of organic material inside of it, and that organic material is going to decompose over time. So it's going to start to disappear and compact itself. that is not a problem, because what has happened during that time is that we've had a lot of roots that is going to have been grown into the pumice around this soil bit here. So as that decomposes, it doesn't matter because you have roots inside of the pumice. And as this decomposes, you can just add pumice to your system. When you see that you get a little on top of the pumice, it starts to sink in a little bit, and that is the soil that is decomposing. You can just add pumice on top, and after a lot of time, after a couple of years, you will have a system that is completely your soil, your pumice mix inside of that pot. But it will take some time. But the reason that we use this soil and that we do not bare root, take away that soil and plant it completely in pumice, is that is a difficult thing to manage, because always when you bare root a plant, you're actually stepping into a very dangerous zone, because the plant doesn't like to be bare rooted, and you could injure it more than you're trying to help it by placing it in pumice. So there's no reason to do that. Just keep the soil it comes in and add the pumice around and underneath. And when it starts to sink down, when it decomposes the soil, just add pumice to your pot. Question number 5, and this is concerning our video, all you need to know about Dracaena Massangeana, or corn plant. If you haven't watched that video, please go and do that. And the question here is, I noticed the pot is not a huge one. Should they remain in smaller pots? So the corn plant, usually when you buy a corn plant, it comes in a container that is not very big. A plastic container like this one, but it's not very big. Should you repot it in a bigger container? Well, and this is concerning all Dracaenas. The Dracaena doesn't need a lot of substrate, soil or pumice, to be able to survive. It actually has quite a small root system. It doesn't have a very extensive, big, fat root system that is going to be all in the container. It has a very small root system. So it doesn't need a large pot. And also, if you repot your Dracaena in a very big pot, you could do that. But what could happen is that if you repot it and you put it in soil, some sort of a soil mixture, normal planting soil mixture, when you water that soil, it's going to be quite wet. And it's going to take a longer period of time for all that soil to start to dry out. And the Dracaena wants to dry out in between waterings, but it's going to take a very long time for all that soil to be dry. So the roots are actually going to be moist a very long period of time. And if that time goes too far, it will start to damage the roots. So by keeping your container relatively small, you're actually helping the Dracaena to become healthier. Now that doesn't mean that you shouldn't repot your Dracaena. If you notice that you have, for instance, a problem of percolation, that means that when you water your plant, the water doesn't go through the system, it actually runs outside to the sides of the pot and goes down in between the soil here, you probably have, your Dracaena have probably been standing there quite some time, and you have an extensive root system and the water can't get through that root system, then of course you have to repot it. But if you don't have any problems like that, you don't need to repot your Dracaena. It is quite good to have it in a relatively small pot so that it dries out in between watering. Now if you use a pumice system, you will almost never get that problem, because the pumice always suck up about 30% of its volume of water, and then it drops that water down. But you still have the air inside of each pumice particle. So you won't get that problem in pumice, but if you have it in soil, keep it quite small. Question number 6. and this is concerning our video, all you need to know about pumice. Can I use the same idea with a pot with holes for drainage in it? I mean, can you use the pumice and water my plants often when necessary? So when we made that video, all you need to know about Dracaena, we made that in a closed system, in a closed container. But if you have holes in the bottom, can you still use pumice the same way? Yes, you can. You can use pumice the same way, but I have a couple of things I would recommend you to do. And we actually have a whole society that uses pumice in that way, and that is the bonsai society. If you are a bonsai enthusiast, you know that when you plant those trees, you usually always plant a bonsai in a pot with holes in the bottom, so that all the excess water is going to go out. And in bonsai, you use pumice as one of the mediums in your soil mixture. And usually it could be like 1/3 pumice, 1/3 clay in the form of akadama clay, and 1/3 of something like a lava stones, or it could also be scoria or something more, a little bit harder than pumice. You have a mixture of 1/3 of each in that soil. Now, if we should plant a plant in pumice that we use, that is mostly pumice, a little bit of clay, and long-term nutrients, what would happen is that it would be able to hold quite a lot of water, and the excess water would go outside of the holes in the bottom and go away. But the one thing you would need to water it a little bit more often than if you had a closed system, of course. But the problem you can have is that you don't have enough clay in that system. And what the clay does in our pumice mixture is that it has cation exchange capacity called CEC. And we have a video called All You Need to Know About Fertilizing Your Indoor Plants. Watch that, where I explain to you exactly what that means. What does CEC mean? But basically, it's the capacity to bind nutrients in your system. So if we use our type of pumice in a hold container in the bottom, when we add the fertilizer, we only have small percentage of our total volume that is clay, that is able to bind that nutrients. So when you fertilize, a lot of the nutrients are just going to go through that system and go out. If I have a closed system, it's not the same problem, because the nutrients that are not going to be binded by the clay is going down to the bottom of the pot, and then by capillary force and by the roots trying to seek out that water with the fertilizer, you will be able to get that fertilizer in your system as well. But if you have holes, that is going to go away, and you might not get the right amount of fertilizer in your system. So if you have drainage holes and you want to use pumice, I would make a mix that has more clay in it. And I would think that you would have to have maybe between 20 or 30% of your total mix should be clay, so that you have enough clay particles in your mixture to bind those nutrients when you add fertilizer. So yes, it will work. However, please add a little bit more clay to your system if you have drainage holes in the bottom. Okay, question number 7. I just rescued a fiddle leaf fig from my job. They were going to throw him into the trash, and he is in terrible shape. Just about every leaf is brown, split, or have broken pieces on it. Do I cut each of those leaves off that are terribly looking to help him grow and become happy? Now this is concerning our All You Need to Know About Fiddle Leaf Fig video. And the question, or an important thing here, is that just because the plant to you is not looking very well. It has some split leaves. It has some brown spots on the leaves and so on. That doesn't mean that the plant is not happy. It just means that it's had a rough life, a hard life, where it has been standing. It doesn't mean that it's not happy. And if you cut off all of those leaves, and you say here that a lot of the leaves are not looking very good, if you cut off all those leaves, what you're actually doing is that you're hurting the plant, because you're taking away all of the solar panels for that plant. Because even if a leaf is a little bit split, it has a little bit of a split in it, if it's still green, you can see that it's still photosynthesizing. It's still using that sunlight to create sugars within the plant to make it feel well. If you take away that leaf, you're actually making the plant weaker. So just because the plant to you is not looking very nice, it doesn't mean that it's not feeling well. So what I would do is that make sure that when you get that plant home, you take care of it as best as you can. Follow our instruction in that video, but don't take off any leaves. Now, when you see that that plant is actually starting to grow again, you get new leaves coming out of the top of the plant. It could even try to branch out somewhere. When you see that, you know that, okay, now it is in an energy positive. It is growing. It is feeling well. Now I can go in and prune off those leaves that I don't like, that is not looking very good, because it has new leaves that can photosynthesize and keep that plant feeling well. So keep them on until you know that the plant is feeling really, really well. Then you can start removing them. But if the leaf is in very bad shape, if it's starting to become all brown or all yellow, or if you see that it's really not feeling well, then you can remove that leaf because it's not doing anything for the plant. But if it only has a split leaf or some green spots on brown spots on it, leave it until you know that you can remove it. Question number 8, and this is concerning our all you need to know about Dracaena Massangeana or corn plant. I rooted a head of a corn plant for propagation. I've looked at several of these videos after the fact, and I planted it in soil. It's been months and it remains healthy looking and green, but not sure what to do. Wait and see if it grows a trunk or what. This is very, very common concerning all Dracaenas. If you take a cutting, it will take about a month if you put it in water until you get the roots are starting to form inside of that water. And when you then do that transition and you plant it in soil, it will take quite a lot of time before the plant will start to grow, because it focuses all of its energy, all of those sugars that it's creating via the photosynthesis are actually going to go down and create a new root system in that soil. And when it's ready, when that root system is ready and done, then it will start to grow and try and be bigger. But all of the energy right now is going to the roots. So just wait. That's my answer to you. Just wait. Keep doing what you're doing because it's looking healthy, then you're doing everything right. So just wait and you will see that it will start to grow when it's ready to grow. Question number 9. It's concerning our all you need to know about olive trees, or Olea europea. And the question is, my olive tree is struggling to grow from the center. Will I have to prune it? And this is very, very common for olive trees because usually an olive tree has a very big crown to it, and it almost entirely grows from the tips of each branch. That is where it's going to get the new growth. So if something happens to your tree and it starts to lose a couple of leaves inside of the crown, that will usually not come back again. So it's very often here in Sweden when we try to keep our olive trees over winter. Something happens to it, it loses a lot of leaves inside of the crown, but it's still alive. And when it starts to grow again, it's only growing from the outside of the branches, from the tips of the branches. So it looks really bad inside. This is very common, and it will not, if the plant is feeling extremely well, you could get new growth inside of that crown. But if you're not, then I would recommend you to start to prune it. And what would I do is that I would take a couple of branches every year, just a couple of them, and cut it down really hard, so that you don't only leave maybe 5 to 10 centimeters of that branch from the trunk of the tree, from the main stem, the trunk. So cut it down really, really hard. And that little cut there is going to start to produce new leaves next year. So if you do that to a couple of branches every year, you will gradually get a more compact and nice looking inside of that crown. You could also cut the entire plant, of course, but that is quite dangerous because if you cut it too hard, it could die. It probably won't because the olive tree is quite strong. It will start to regrow, but it will take a long time before you get new big branches on it. So cut a couple of them really, really hard and just make those cuttings form the new inside of your crown. Question number 10, and this is concerning our All You Need to Know About Ficus Lyrata video, or the fiddle leaf fig. I got my fiddle leaf fig in January. I noticed the new roots are growing, but not new leaves. I actually notching it to encourage new growth of the leaves. Did I do something crazy and stupid? Now, this is the fiddle leaf fig. It looks like this. It's a very small specimen, this one, but there are 3 different types, there are 3 different ways to make the fiddle leaf fig to branch out. Now, I said in that video that it is very hard to get the fiddle leaf fig to branch out. Most of you won't succeed in this. But there are 3 different ways you can make it branch. You can try and make it branch. But before I go into the 3 different steps, there are a couple of things you need to do before you do any of these. And first of all, you need to know that the plant is feeling really, really well. And one of the things to know that is that you actually have new leaves that are growing. Because when the plant is growing and when it's active, you know that it's feeling very, very well. So, said here in the question that the fiddle leaf fig was bought in January. That's just 2-3 months ago. And I think that is a little bit too soon because that plant hasn't settled in at your place yet. It's not ready for a pruning or an attempt to try and make that branch out. The other thing is the timing. Like I said, the plant needs to feel very good. You need to see that it's starting to grow. And you only make these 3 different things during those 2 times of year when you know that the plant is active. And the plant is active in spring when it gets a lot of light. Inside you have a higher humidity. And it's also active during the autumn. Usually it's not active by producing new leaves, but it's very active making new roots in the autumn. Any of these 2 times you can make one of these 3 attempts to make this branch out. But you have to make sure that it's feeling well before you do. Now, the first thing The first thing is simply called pruning. And it means that when your plant has reached the height where you want it to branch out. So let's say that we have this plant here, and I want it to branch out from here. I want it to get new buds and branch out from here. You simply make a complete cut. You make a pruning of the tip here. So you just cut it straight off. And you always cut it a couple of centimeters above the latest leaf here. So a couple of centimeters above, you make the cut straight off. And what's going to happen is that this little guy here is going to become the new apex, and you could get some new buds around that cut. So you could get a lot of branching here. 1, maybe 2, maybe even 3 new buds that will try and branch out. That is one way to do it, by making a complete cut or a pruning of the fiddle leaf fig. But you're actually losing this part of the plant that is going to go away completely. That is number 1. Number 2. Number 2 is called notching. And this you can do this if you want to keep the entire plant as it is, but you want it to try and make it branch out like this. And what you do then is that you go around to this stem here and make small cuts. You take a sharp scissor and make small cuts, couple of millimeters or up to a centimeter just above the latest leaf. So if I look at this leaf here, I go in here and a couple of millimeters above it, I just make a small incision. Now, here's the tricky part. If you make that cut too deep, you will hurt the plant. If you make that cut not deep enough, nothing will happen. It will bleed a little bit from that cut, but nothing will happen. So you have to make that cut about 1 millimeter into the stem here. Just make a little bit of a cut. What I recommend you to do is actually make 2 small cuts with 1 millimeter in between. So you make one down here, 1 millimeter above, you make another one, but you go in an angle down to where you make the first cut. So you will get a little bit of a shaving or of the stem here. Now, the theory here is that what's going to happen is that it's going to start to bleed a little bit. When that stops, it's going to start to callus around that wound. And you could get a new bud from that point. So you could get it to branch out. That is called notching. You notch a little bit, you make a little scar into the tissue. But, and here is the very important thing, I would never do it to this plant, because this stem here is still green. To be able to make the notching work, you have to do it on older stems that have become completely, as we can look down here, you see that it's starting to become brown here. It's starting to become more of a stem-like shape. It's not new and green, it's starting to become more hard and brown. It's that type of stem you should do the notching on, never the green ones, because it will probably not work. You have to wait until you have a brown, hardened stem. The third thing you can do is something called pinching. Pinching is something completely different. When your plant has reached the height that you want it to branch out, you think that, okay, my plant is now 2 meters high. I don't want it to become larger than this. Then you could try pinching it. Because if we say that this plant is this height here, what I can do then is that on top of this small branch here, you have the apical the apical bud here, the latest bud that is on top of the branch. It's here that the next leaf is going to form. It's from here. If I go in and remove that bud, just pull it off or cut it off, you could get you could get new buds down here with the other leaves. Now the reason for that is because in every plant inside we have different types of hormones inside of the plant. Now this is a hormone that is active here that's called auxin. And auxin's job inside of the plant is to make sure that the plant grows up and bigger. So what it does is that the plant accumulates a lot of auxin here to the apical bud up here. And this tells the plant that it's from here that I'm going to continue grow. If you take away that auxin, it will grow from somewhere else on the stem instead. Because the auxin is actually working against all of the other buds on that stem. The auxin is telling the plant, you should grow from here. Not here, not here, not here. If you remove that, you could get a branching from somewhere else on that stem. That is called pinching. Removing the auxin to try and get other buds to grow and not the apical bud. Question number 11, and this is concerning our video, all you need to know about fertilizing your green indoor plants. I would like to know if you recommend foliage fertilizer. I have a big ficus Lyrata inside of my house and just one branch out of the 4 branches has new growth on it. Do you think it would help? Now when we talked in that video about fertilizer, we only talked about fertilizing the roots of the plant. We never got into foliage fertilizing. And I know that this is an upcoming thing, that more and more people are using it. And it works. There are laboratory tests on this that foliage fertilizer actually works quite well. At least not through all the different types of nutrients, but the big 3 works quite fine with foliage fertilizer. However, what I think you're asking here is that you have 4 different branches and you have only one that is growing new leaves. So what you want is for the other 3 to start growing. And if I understand you correctly, what you want to do is that you want to spray that foliage fertilizer on those 3 to make those 3 start to grow again. However, that is not going to work because, as we say in that video, the big 3, the nitrogen, the phosphorus and the potassium, they are all mobile inside of the plant. It can move around inside of the plant. So if you spray those 4, you spray those 3 that is not working, that is not producing new leaves, the fertilizer inside, when it absorbs that through the stomata or through klivöppningarna in Swedish, it's actually going to be transporting it around inside of the plant. So that nutrient is also going to that apex one, that stronger one that is growing right now. So it wouldn't work for what you want it to work for, but foliage fertilizing works quite well, but not in that way, not to be able to get those 3 to start growing. And another thing concerning the foliage fertilizer is that you need to make sure that you don't use it in the wrong way, because when you spray the fertilizer on the plant, make sure that it's not standing or that it's not too hot. If it's in the middle of the summer, it's really, really hot, it means that the plant is actually closing a lot of the stomata, these small windows that it's opening and closing to be able to regulate the temperature all the time inside of the pot. And that's also where you're going to absorb that foliage nutrients. It's through that stomata. And when it's really, really hot, the plant is actually closing a lot of those openings to try and keep the water inside of the plant so that it doesn't just evaporate. It's trying to use that water to be able to photosynthesize and so on. So when you spray it when it's really, really hot, or if it's standing in full sunlight, a lot of that nutrients is going to disappear. It's going to dissolve and disappear into the air. It's not going to be absorbed by the plant. And also, if it's standing in the middle of the sun, it could also burn the leaves as well. So make sure when you add that foliage fertilizer, you add it in the morning or in the evening if it is a very hot situation, so that you know that those stomatas are really working as they should. They are open and ready to receive that nutrients. Question number 12. And this is concerning all you need to know about fertilizing your green indoor plants as well. But it's also concerning our pumice video. And the question is, in another video you advocate for planting in pure pumice. But in this one it seems that you recommend not planting in pure pumice because of its low CEC, or cation exchange capacity. Can you clarify, please? Perfect question. Now I actually had to review our All You Need to Know About Pumice video to make sure that I'm not doing anything wrong in there. I had to check. And I say at least 2 times in that video that it's not pure pumice that we're using. It is pumice with a mixture of clay and long-term nutrient pellets. So it is not pure pumice we're using. And this is because of the CEC. Pumice does not have a cation exchange capacity. Clay does. So that is why we add clay to our pumice, to make sure that it captures that nutrients as it passes through our system. So every time you hear me say that we plant in pumice, I say that because it's easier and I don't have to say all the time, we plant in pumice, clay and long-term nutrient pellets. It takes a long time to say. So it's not pure pumice. It is a mixture of mostly pumice. I don't have the exact amount, but approximately 90% pumice, 10% clay, and a little bit of long-term nutrients as well added there. But the clay is the very, very important part here, to be able to bind those nutrients when we add fertilizer to our pumice mix. So that is all we have for today. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Hit that bell so you get a notification every time we put up something new. And also hit that like button as well so that more people can be able to watch our videos. The more people watching, the more videos we can put out to you guys. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to leave them in the commentary section. We will be making more Q&A videos. And if it's not exactly your question that we are answering, it could be indirectly your question, because a lot of the questions we get are of similar nature. So until next time, hej då!